Hello dear students, welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 6th May 2024 and we have been discussing the important articles from the Hindu newspaper. So before discussing those important and relevant news articles, let's try to solve yesterday's practice question. So a day before yesterday, I've given you one practice question that is with respect to the 9-dash line. So what is the correct statement with respect to 9-dash line, or which of the following is known as 9-dash line? So option A says it is a maritime boundary line that is being drawn by China to maintain or to claim sovereignty over vast portion of the South China Sea. And second statement says it is a historical demarcation line indicating traditional fishing grounds in Southeast Asia. Option C, a boundary marker established the international consensus to delineate territorial waters in the Pacific Ocean. And option D says an imaginary lane used by navigators to indicate safe shipping lanes in the Indian Ocean. So it is very important that the South China Sea is regularly in use because of Chinese claims over the South China Sea and its conflicts with some of the member countries in the Asian multilateral grouping. So therefore the 9-dash line actually a maritime boundary line which is being drawn by China unilaterally to claim sovereignty over a vast portion of South China Sea. So therefore the correct answer is A. So we'll try to understand briefly about the 9-dash line. So in fact, if you look at this 9-dash line, this is how this 9-dash line has been drawn by China. That is being indicated on a dotted line in red color. Right, so this is the South China Sea, and in fact over this 9-dash line and over the South China Sea there were a number of claims over the South China Sea from different countries, whether Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia or Indonesia. So all those countries have claims over the South China Sea, but China has unilaterally drawn this boundary line, that is 9-dash line. So it is a historical demarcation line on a map which is being used by China especially to assert its territorial claims in the South China Sea. So China wanted to assert its territorial claims over the South China Sea because it is held that in the South China Sea there are a lot of resources, and at the same time South China Sea plays a very important role as a strategic bed for China. And apart from that, China also asserts 90% claim over the South China Sea, primarily because of its historical U-shaped 9-dash line. So that is being drawn up on the map that is being used by China since 1940s. And in fact, this 9-dash line also encompasses a lot of islands such as the Spratly Island, Parcel Island and various other islands are actually part of the South China Sea. And in fact, China has been building the artificial islands and at the same time claiming sovereignty over these islands as well. So however, the countries which are littoral in the South China Sea have actually approached the Permanent Court of Arbitration under the United Nations Convention on Law of Seas. However, the Permanent Court of Arbitration has given a judgment so that has said that China has determined that China's claim over this 9-dash line of South China Sea in this region actually lacks any legal foundation. So Chinese arguments are not legal in nature. So therefore, the Permanent Court of Arbitration has given a judgment in favor of the other countries such as Philippines and Vietnam, those countries. So therefore this is 9-dash line, and let's move to the today practice question. So today practice question is which of the following statements regarding Article 39B of the Indian Constitution are correct. So the statement are: it mandates the provision of adequate means of livelihood to all citizens. And option B says it directs state to ensure equal pay for equal work for both men and women. And option C says it emphasizes on the distribution of ownership and control of material resources to serve the common good. And option D says it guarantees right to education for all citizens. So please understand this question and also try to answer this question in the comment section, and the correct answer I'll be providing you in the next session. So we'll proceed further to discuss today's important news articles. So first very important news article that is in news is India has a stringent norms for the pesticide residues limit. Now recently what happened is that Indian spices were rejected in Hong Kong, and they were also rejected in Singapore because they have a pesticide residue content, and that could pose significant health risks for the consumers. And because of that reason, Singapore and Hong Kong have imposed or recalled Indian based spice products. So however, there were claims that Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has been allowing higher content of or higher amount of residue on the spices. So therefore, in order to clarify this, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India actually issued a clarification. Okay, now briefly understand the context of this particular article. So it says that India has one of the most stringent norms of pesticide residue in food items, that is held by the government and at the same time Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. So in fact, this was held by Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. That it is said that the false claims are actually claiming that the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India allows high level of residue in the spices and other herbs, because the spices and spices related products are actually rejected in other countries because of a higher pesticide residue content. Now we'll understand what exactly is this pesticide residue. So pesticide residue refers to pesticides, because in agriculture we regularly use pesticides to kill pests and improve the agriculture productivity. So due to monocropping also, the pest infestation is very high. Okay, so with monocropping practices in agriculture, the pest infestation is very high, and therefore we are using a higher amount of pesticides in agriculture. And in fact, the pesticide residue remain in food for a longer periods of time, even after they are applied on the food crops. Okay, for example, when we cultivate the food crop and we use pesticides to kill pests, and these pesticide residues actually remain on the food crops for the longer durations of a time. However, the maximum allowable levels of these pesticide residues, especially in food crops, are actually controlled or stipulated by the regulatory bodies in many countries. And in India, the regulatory body is Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. So that stipulates the residue, the pesticide residue in the food crops. Now we'll understand how the pesticide residues actually reaching consumers. So how consumers have been, this pesticide residues are actually reaching to the consumers. So they essentially come in 4 different sources or 4 different ways they actually reaching to consumers. So one is when we use these pesticides in the agriculture. So when consumers eat those agriculture produce which is being used, earlier pesticides are being used, and secondly the pesticide use or application to harvest the produce. Okay, so after cultivation, in order to harvest the produce, so there are certain farmers who are also using these pesticides. And apart from that, their presence in imported foods, and this is also another way it reaching the consumers. And after that, the banned substances, for example DDT is a banned substance. Okay, so the banned substances discharged into the environment, and they also contaminate the existing environment. So all these factors have been a key determinants of how the pesticides are actually reaching the end consumers. So however, how can we control the pesticide residue? Now in this image you can see the negative health risks or health risks which are being associated with the pesticide contamination or higher pesticide residue in food. Okay, so in fact the pesticide residue can directly damage the cells, and biomolecular disruptions also takes place, and biotransformation of toxic metabolites also takes place, and it also results in impaired fertility of the human beings. So it not just impacts the human beings, but it also impacts the environment, ecosystem, and also the biodiversity of an area where the pesticides are increasingly used. Now it also associated with other health risks such as abortion, stillbirth and premature birth. And there are certain hormonal disruptions also which takes place because of the higher pesticide residue in food or human beings exposed to the pesticide residue. So they include after birth low weight of the child, and at the same time the developmental defects among the child. So all these factors can be commonly associated with the higher residues in the fertilizer. Now how can we control the pesticide residue in food that we consume? So a very simple thing that we have to do is peeling. So when before we eat something, for example, imagine a banana. So before we eat banana, we must peel the outer layer of the banana, and that is how that is a one simple way to avoid these pesticides through peeling. And apart from that, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India is being accused of allowing the higher pesticide residue in foods in India. Now we'll briefly understand what exactly is this Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. So in fact, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India is a statutory body, and it is under the administrative control of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Please remember this because UPSC already asked a prelims question on this. Okay, so it is a statutory body. It was constituted in the year 2006 and it was under the administrative control of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Now what is the role and responsibility of the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India? So it actually regulates and controls manufacture, storage, distribution, sale, import of various other food articles, and at the same time it also establishes standards to ensure food safety. So all the food safety in India is looked after by Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, and also prohibits the adulteration of the food by the various food processing industries or food manufacturing companies. Now when we talk about the headquarters of the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, so it is located in New Delhi. Along with that, it also has several regional offices. So it has 6 regional offices at different places including New Delhi, Guwahati, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai and Cochin. So in all these places, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has regional offices. Now we'll try to understand why it is in use, why the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India is actually in use. So it is because a ban was imposed by Hong Kong food regulator, like how in India we have Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. So in Hong Kong also there was a food regulator. And in fact, if you look at India, in India, MDH and Everest are one of the most popular masala brands or spice based brands, both MDH and Everest. So these are also exported to countries like Hong Kong and even to countries like Singapore. However, the Hong Kong food regulator has imposed restrictions on the both MDH masala and Everest masala. So because these spice mixes have a higher presence of pesticide, so that is ethylene oxide in their samples. Okay, so the food regulator in Hong Kong says that both MDH and Everest have a higher presence of pesticide called ethylene oxide. So ethylene oxide is a pesticide residue, and in fact the pesticide residue is associated with several negative health risks, and because of that reason the Hong Kong based food regulator has imposed restrictions on both MDH and Everest. And followed by Hong Kong, Singapore food regulator to order to recall one of the spice brand, so that is Everest brand, because it also consists of higher pesticide residue content, and because of that reason the Singapore food regulator has also followed the suit of Hong Kong food regulator. However, now what is the responsibility of the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India? It will ensure that the food safety is maintained, and at the same time it also set the standards for the food. Now the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India comes into picture, and it has been collecting samples from both the brands of spices, both MDH and Everest. It has been collecting those samples, and especially the masalas or spices which are sold in the domestic markets, to ensure that both these spice brands are actually comply with the quality norms and also the other standards set by the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. However, it does not regulate the quality of exported products. The Food Safety and Standards Authority of India will not regulate the standards of these masala brands, but now it has been collecting samples of these two brands to test their quality. And in fact, the Union Health Ministry has also clarified, after allegations leveled against Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, that maximum residual limits are actually different for various food products based on their overall risk assessment. However, the allegations which are being leveled against the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India have no clear basis. And in fact, the reports which are claiming that Food Safety and Standards Authority of India allows 10 times more pesticide residue in herbs and spices, such reports are false and malicious. So this is what the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has actually said. And in fact, the very same agency has also said that India has one of the most stringent standards of maximum residual limits in the world, because the public health is a key concern for the regulator. Okay, so this is the news about the pesticide residue in India's spice products. Now, inequality has been regularly in news. Now, it is like every day there is one article. And in fact, the inequality has also been directly mentioned in the Directive Principles of State Policy. So therefore, it is very, very important, since we are going for the 18th Lok Sabha elections. The inequality issue forms one of the key aspects of the campaigning of different political parties, and because of that reason, inequality is in news. Now, what is the context of this particular article? So recently, Congress party has actually released its election manifesto. And in this election manifesto, a word redistribution has dominated the election discourse. Now, redistribution of the wealth. Now, if you look at India, inequalities have been growing at a faster pace. The rich becoming more rich and poor becoming more poor. So that is the main concern in India that we have been experiencing. Because various reports, including Oxfam, have claimed that top 1% of India's population own a wealth of around 40%. And top 10% of India's total wealthy population own more than 70% of India's total national wealth. So therefore, in this context, the redistribution of wealth plays a very, very important role, because we need to make poor rich, or we need to ensure or to provide more opportunities for the poor people, so that they can be able to improve themselves and they can become a well-off communities, and they can also improve their living standards. Now understand, world is becoming more and more unequal. That is true. Why? Because the rich are becoming richer and poor are becoming poorer. And it is not in the larger interest of any society, because if inequalities continues to grow, that is not in the interest of any society. Okay, so however, the real argument is that how one should bridge the gap and aspire for a more equal and just society. And how can we bridge this gap, and how can we aspire for a more equal, egalitarian and just society? And that is the basis of more sustainable and inclusive development in any society. So in fact, please understand, if there are higher levels of inequality in any society, so that would threaten the peace and stability of the nation. Okay, so that could have a severe social conflicts in the future if inequalities continues to grow, because of limited opportunities which are being available for the people. So therefore, the gap between the rich and the poor can be bridged by either making the rich poorer. So there are two options that we must do. One is either we have to make a rich poorer or poor richer, or both. Now please understand, we cannot make rich poorer. We can make it, but it is not a sustainable solution in front of us, because now rich are actually one of the section of the economy who invest a lot, and they are the ones who actually run the economy. So therefore, if we make rich poorer, that will not translates into a better strategy to deal with the inequality. But on the other hand, we can make poor richer. We can focus more on this. How can we make poor more richer? Okay, so to achieve more equal, egalitarian and just society is shaped by what sociologists call as a Pareto optimum. So Pareto optimum actually a sociological concept, and this Pareto optimum says that it is impossible to make one person better off without making another worse off. So that is essentially a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game. So for example, imagine that there are two individuals, one is rich and one is poor. Now in order to make sure that if we wanted to improve the conditions of poor, then we must be able to tax the rich person. So if we wanted to make this person, poor person, well off, then we must able to make the rich person worse off in any way. For example, we can tax him more, so that would lead to the worse off conditions of the rich person. So that is the Pareto optimum. And in fact, the developed nations, so that can only grow slowly, are forced to adopt this Pareto path in reducing inequalities. So most of the developed countries have followed this Pareto path. But on the other hand, what about countries like India, which are developing nations? So they can grow much faster, and those developing countries which grow much faster, they no need to adopt this Pareto principle. So please understand this Pareto principle. So it says that it is impossible to make a person better off without making another person worse off. Okay, so there is no need to adopt Pareto principle or Pareto optimum for countries like India, and this is the fundamental philosophical difference across ideological spectrum solving the inequality. Now how can we solve inequality? We are going to discuss this briefly. And in fact, the idea of a wealth tax to extract from the super rich or give it to the poor actually stems from the zero-sum thought to reduce economic disparity. Now please understand that there are a wide variety of economic disparities or huge economic disparities that we are seeing in our country. So one way of bridging these economic disparities is imposing more and more taxes on the rich people. So the wealth of the rich people must be taxed, so that though the wealth can be used for the betterment of the poor people. So however, this is a zero-sum game. Okay, so no wealth is created, but the wealth of the rich would be taken and given it to the poor people. So however, no new wealth is created in this particular thing. And in fact, there are also demands of imposing inheritance tax. For example, one person inherits the property from his or her father or his or her ancestors. And in fact, the inheritance tax to some extent also seems morally correct. So that is taxing the rich because they are inheriting a huge property and this is not their own property. So therefore, it sounds morally correct. However, these measures will not provide any new resources, because we need to create more and more new resources that will have a significant impact. And at the same time, these measures will not foster any healthy climate, so that could reduce rich-poor disparity. So these measures are not sustainable in the long term. So why it is not sustainable in the long term? Because to grow at a faster pace or economic growth for any country is very, very important. Okay, so therefore economic growth is necessary for increasing the size of overall economic pie. Only then we can redistribute the wealth among different sections. However, this economic growth actually requires investment, and rich people can actually make more and more investments in the economy. So if we are taxing the rich people more, then it would be like a disincentive for them. So they will not invest more money in the economy, and that would impact the economic growth of our country. So therefore, India's inequality is actually a result of lopsided economic growth and taxation. So these two are key factors which are major contributors of India's inequality. Both lopsided economic growth and even the taxation also. And in fact, it is also very well known that India has been experiencing the jobless growth, even though we are registering 7%, 8% growth rate per annum after 1991 economic reforms. But India's growth is largely known as the jobless growth, or it is called as the jobless growth. So why? Because now if you look at the transition of India's economy, so we have made a transition directly from the agriculture sector to the industrial agriculture sector to the service sector. So we skipped the industrial sector, and industrial sector is one of the largest employment creator. So since we have skipped the industrial sector and we started emphasizing more on the service sector, India's growth is known as the jobless growth, where even though we have been seeing the GDP growth rate, so that has not translated into jobs, incomes and prosperity for the large majority of the people. So that is the problem here. And in fact, every percentage of the GDP growth today generates less than 1/4 of the number of formal jobs. Okay, so yes, India's economy is growing, but growing economy is not creating enough employment opportunities for our youth. Now, India is very well known for its demographic dividend, large number of working age population. So if economy is not able to create employment opportunities for large number of youth in the working age, how can we reduce the inequalities in the society? So therefore, that is very important here, because even though the GDP growth is positive, that is not creating enough employment opportunities. So why it is not creating the enough employment opportunities? Because if you look at the contemporary economic development models, so we have emphasized more on the capital intensive industries rather than the labor intensive industries. So there are certain labor intensive industries, for example, automobile industry, leather industry, footwear industry, textile industry. So those industries are known as the labor intensive industries. So we emphasized less on these labor intensive industries, and that is where we are not able to create enough employment opportunities. But under Make in India program and several other programs, we can expect that we can create a huge employment. However, so please also understand, MSME sector can also play a huge role in providing the employment opportunities. And in fact, India's inequality is the imbalance in taxation, where the common person pay more than the corporate share in the taxes. Okay, so if you look at India's overall taxation basket, the common people, the poor people or the middle class, below middle class people pay higher taxes than all the rich people, even though the rich have owned more wealth, and that is where the inequality problems exist in India. So therefore, what we must do to prevent this or to reduce the existing inequalities and disparities? So it is very important that we must ensure social security. So we have to provide this social security net through welfare programs, and those welfare programs must be targeted to the genuine beneficiaries, so that the poor can be able to reap the benefits of the economic growth, and redistribution of wealth would also take place. And apart from that, these welfare programs have to be taken up through a combination of faster growth, higher tax buoyancy. So tax buoyancy is actually, so increasing economic growth, increasing GDP should also correspond with the increasing tax to GDP ratio, and at the same time efficient welfare delivery without having to resort penalizing the rich. So all these factors actually play an instrumental role in reducing the inequalities, existing inequalities in this society. So a pragmatic approach to reducing rich poor gap is actually maximizing the economic growth and also ensuring redistribution of existing wealth along with the above mentioned measures. And apart from all these things, we must focus on creating gainful employment opportunities for our youth, and at the same time lowering the tax burden on the common person, because common persons are the one who are paying or who are sharing the higher tax burden rather than the wealthy populations. And at the same time, we must also look for providing safety nets for the poor populations also. So all these factors are very essential in reducing inequalities. So therefore, we should also look for other things that are, delicate balancing act of labor market incentives, welfare safety nets or social safety nets, and attracting large scale investments. So all these factors are very, very important. And in fact, we are very optimistic that India would be able to reduce inequalities by making the poor richer without having to make the rich poorer. So this is actually the essence of this particular editorial. So next we'll proceed on to the next important editorial. So that is with respect to the setting up of Indian Defence University. Now, Indian Defence University is very, very important because see, so we are located in a complex neighborhood, and the dynamics of war, the strategies of the war have been regularly changing. So along with the complex neighborhood, India also aspires to play a larger role in this complex international order. So therefore, our armed forces must be ready to deal with any situation. And the capacities and the capabilities of our armed forces should be developed in such a manner that they could be able to deal with the new challenges that this new era warfare faces or poses. And in fact, in this context, India does not have any defense university as of now. But if you look at Pakistan, Pakistan has defense university, and in fact China also had its own defense universities, but India does not have the defense university. So in this article, the author Admiral Karambir Singh, he was a vice admiral, former vice admiral. So he has been saying that there is a need to operationalize Indian Defense University. So please briefly understand the context of this article. So while the nature of war or warfare remains constant, the changing character of the war imposes a premium on the military education and academic preparation. So that have to required to cope up with the security challenges that the armed forces have been facing. And in fact, it is reported that Pakistan has created 2 new universities for its armed forces, while China has 3, but India has no defense university, even though such a university in India was first proposed in 1967. Okay, so in India in 1967 it was proposed to set up Indian Defense University, but measures were taken too early. But as of now, we still don't have even a single defense university. So what is the need for professional military education that can be imparted through setting up the Indian Defense University? So what is the need for professional military education? So firstly, if you look at Indian military education, so there are certain Rashtriya Raksha universities. So these Rashtriya Raksha universities are also already established, but they are not that much adequate to deal with the modern warfare, developing or strengthening the capabilities of the armed forces. So therefore, if we compare the Rashtriya Raksha University along with Indian Defense University, so the comparison actually seemed flawed. Okay, so it there is a flawed comparison because the Rashtriya Raksha University's objective and curriculum do not specifically address the modern military requirements. Modern military requirements actually include managing warfare and also executing plans. But Rashtriya Raksha universities are inadequate to deal with these things, so which actually form a crux of the modern warfare. And apart from that, there is a long overdue realization in setting up Indian Defense University, because the establishment of the Indian Defense University has been delayed and delayed so long. Because earlier, remember that 1967 was the year. At that point of time, we wanted to set up this university, Indian Defense University, but it was delayed. Despite the Indian Defense University have a critical role, or it has a very important role in further strengthening existing defense capabilities. So that is very important for defense preparedness, fostering a strategic culture in our armed forces, and also promoting the inter-services integration. Now, if you look at the world, the warfare is becoming more and more dynamic, and it is also rapidly changing. So therefore, dynamic and rapidly changing warfare requires such a university, such a dynamic university which can deal with imparting the strategic culture, promoting inter-service integration, and also ensuring the preparedness among the existing armed forces. So the dynamic and chaotic nature of warfare, particularly in regions like Europe, West Asia, so they require military officers to be able to produce results despite dealing with the unclear information or rapidly changing circumstances. So the author has been making this statement particularly in the context of recent wars in West Asia and also the Russia-Ukraine war. So however, there were efforts to set up this Indian Defense University, but the progress is very slow. So there was a slow progress in establishment of the Indian Defense University. Now, if you look at the historical context of setting up this Indian Defense University, the idea of establishing such a defense services university was first proposed in 1967 by the Chief of Staff's Committee. So this Chief of Staff's Committee in 1967 first proposed setting up of this Indian Defense University. So therefore, it has been indicating a long-standing recognition for the need for a broad-based education system in the Indian Armed Forces. Okay, so especially to strengthen the armed forces, existing armed forces. So however, we see delays in the implementation. It has been continuously delayed setting up this Indian Defense University because there were multiple proposals and even recommendations in 1960s, 1980s setting up of with respect to setting up Indian Defense University. So however, one thing that we must understand here is that the progress towards establishing Indian Defense University was made after the Kargil war. Okay, so a Kargil conflict, late 1990s. So even then also, progress remained very slow, with in principle approval granted in May 2010 to set up Indian Defense University several years after the conflict. Now, even in principle approval was given in May 2019, still we do not have Indian Defense University. So for this particular purpose, a committee was formed to deal with whether we have to set up or establish an Indian Defense University. So following the Kargil conflict, a committee which is chaired by Dr. K. Subramaniam was established to examine the issue of establishing Indian Defense University. So based on the recommendations of the Dr. K. Subramaniam committee, in May 2010, in principle approval was accorded for setting up of the Indian Defense University in Gurgaon, Haryana. Okay, so however, despite some optimism about setting up of this Indian Defense University in 2017 and 18, the progress in setting up such a university is a very slow. So therefore, we must take note of this and we must proceed forward to establish such a defense university in India because it is the need of the heart. Now, in this context, the government commitment in establishing Indian Defense University and funding is very important. Why? Because the government must prioritize setting up of Indian Defense University, and at the same time, proper allocation of funds is necessary for the better functioning of this university, because with the allocation of sufficient funds, sufficient infrastructure can be developed or established, and that could actually help us in achieving all these goals. And after that, the streamlined administrative processes are also very crucial here. So efforts should be made to streamline the bureaucratic processes which are involved in setting up of Indian Defense University, so that there will be no obstacles, there will be no hurdles in setting up of this Indian Defense University, and that can be readily established. And after that, we should also emphasize on stakeholder collaboration. That is very important here. So collaboration between different stakeholders who are involved in establishing the Indian Defense University. So the stakeholders actually include the armed forces themselves, the government agencies, academic institutions, industry partners. So all these stakeholders must collaborate with themselves that could facilitate the expedition of the establishment of Indian Defence University at the earliest. So the next important news article is decline in RBI surplus transfer to the government. Now every year, whatever surplus that RBI have, or we can say that it is a profit that is being made by the RBI, so will be transferred to the government every year. Okay, so that the government will be able to meet its fiscal requirements or fiscal deficit requirements and its welfare policy requirements. So all those requirements can also be met by the surplus transfers from the RBI. But this year there is a decline in RBI surplus transfers to the government. Okay, so there are a number of reasons for that. We will understand what are those reasons, but before that, pause the video and you can go through these two images over the surplus transfers to the government. Now, what is the context of this particular article? So the context is that the Reserve Bank of India may provide a smaller dividend or smaller profit in this financial year 23-24 than the massive 87,416 crore that was paid by the Reserve Bank of India last year to the government. But this year it is expected that the surplus which is being provided by the RBI to the government would set to decline. So this decline in the surplus transfer actually requires a closer examination of underlying causes. What are the causes which actually led to the decline in surplus transfer? And also we must understand the implications on monetary and fiscal policy with respect to the decline of surplus. Now, what are the reasons behind decline in the income of the RBI? So there are a number of reasons which have contributed for the decline of decline of the income or decline of the profit of the RBI. Okay, so first and foremost, RBI has earned low commission income from the forex sales. Now, if RBI sells its existing forex reserves, then RBI would earn a lot of income from the selling of those forex resources. And in this year, RBI sold a few dollars in comparison to the last year, and this is one such factor so which has reduced the income of the RBI. And after that, there are certain factors which are also responsible for the declining income of the RBI. So this decline in forex transactions with the RBI can be attributed to different factors. So they include the global economic conditions that were prevailing, fluctuations in currency exchange rates, and also shifts in trade dynamics. All these factors have contributed to the lower commission income from the forex sales. And apart from that, there is an accelerated growth of RBI's balance sheet during the fiscal year. Now, accelerated growth of a balance sheet of the RBI would actually leads to the expansion of necessitated provisioning of the balance sheet, and thereby it will reduce the available surplus to transfer to the government. This is another issue. And what are the factors which are actually responsible for this balance sheet accelerated growth of balance sheet? So they include monetary policy interventions that are aimed at stabilizing the financial markets. Okay, so in order to stabilize the financial markets, in certain times RBI intervenes. RBI sells the forex reserves it has. So therefore RBI intervention is required to stabilize the markets. And apart from that, the liquidity management measures and response to the economic shocks. So all these factors have created accelerated growth of RBI balance sheets. And after that, we will also understand certain implications of reduced surplus transfer to the government. So there are also certain issues. First and foremost, it will impact the planning on the part of the government. Okay, so from the fiscal perspective, it may pose challenges for the government's budgetary planning and expenditure allocation. Secondly, it will also impact the public spending of the government, because it could necessitate extra adjustments in fiscal policies of the government. So that could effectively impact public spending on critical sectors. So critical sector include healthcare sector, education sector, and even the infrastructure development. Now, so the government has to depend more and more on debt, because now the transfers from the RBI to the government declined. So government will depend more on the debt. So lower surplus transfers may exert upward pressure on the government's fiscal deficit, thereby influencing the debt dynamics and borrowing costs. Okay, so all these factors have posed a serious implications. Okay, so these are the implications of declining surplus transfers from the RBI to the government. Okay, so that's all in this lecture, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button, and thank you.